Hello, guys. Thanks for joining us this evening. Um, Tonight we're going to be speaking to Chris Henry, and we were supposed to have Shaun Murphy on with us this evening, but due to unforeseen circumstances, Shaun can't join us. So we have a very lovely replacement in the form of snooker professional Fergal O'Brien, who works quite closely with Chris, actually. So it'll be an interesting conversation there also. And just before I bring the guys in, when we talk about snooker, snooker is it's fair to say it's a very skilled sport. It's quite difficult. A lot of those things like focusing, preparing yourself, and performing on the table at a venue is a very difficult thing. Thinking, feeling comfortable, essential. Heavy scoring, consistency, dealing with your emotions at the venues, under pressure, all part of the whole structure of this very, very difficult sport that we play. And I think it's putting everything together, and it's very, very important to get everything right and to deal with all those emotions and all those stresses out there. And that's why we're doing this. We're doing this live video this evening to talk about those things and to address the problems. And it's for you, the players, not just the good amateur players out there, but many, many professionals also. So these are the things we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about the snooker brain. If I can get the cats out of the way. She loves you guys so much. Mwah. So, that's today's subject. Today's subject is the snooker brain and putting all those pieces together. And I can't think of anything better to talk about this other than Chris Henry. Chris is a sports psychologist, professional, deals with many different sports people, different sports, not just snooker. He's helped a lot of great players. He's helped Shaun Murphy and many, many other players, world champions, to come along and improve their games and look at the areas where they have difficulties. And I'm just going to bring him on, actually. Make the best of it. Just bring him on here. Well, there he is. Chris, can you hear me okay?
I can, Dave, yes.
Right, okay. Thanks very much for joining us. I was just telling the guys about you. I can't praise you enough. You are a top sports coach, by the way, and I know you are. You're the best in the business. You've told me many times. But you're here for a reason, and I love talking to you, Chris, because when we did that interview earlier on the year there, during the first lockdown, we touched on a lot of very, very important things. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of players took a lot of it on board, but then it's a difficult area, really. The psychology of any sport can be a very difficult area for participants or for players or professional sports people to actually digest and listen to someone like yourself. But we're here to talk about snooker, and we're here to talk about the problems that go on out there. And, we touched on those things last time we spoke. We touched on those things like players preparing themselves, traveling, venue, nerves, emotions, preparation, performance on the table. And we see it over and over again. We see the problems over and over again. What would you say, Chris, are the key things that the players need to look at when they get to the venues and why they have all these little problems that go on?
Well, they're obviously looking to perform at their best in these match situations is obviously the goal. I mean, we spoke last time about identifying the things that you can't control, like results. You can't control results, so why get too busy with that? Of course, you want to win. We know that. But you've got to take a step back from there and look at what are the things that you can control that help you to perform at your best. Because ultimately, if you can perform well on a consistent basis, the results are going to be pretty positive. But too many people get caught up in trying to control results. And then if you look at performance, Dave, some players will argue that you should be able to control your performance. Well, unfortunately, you can't control your performance because not necessarily, because if you could, you'd perform at your best all the time. But we don't do that. And it's a complex thing. You know, the subconscious part of the brain, which is where I specialize, the subconscious is controlling all of our emotional states for many different reasons in different situations. So you've got to get into programming that part of your brain for it to deal with things in the right way, so that, because emotion has the biggest impact on performance at the professional level. Most of these guys can play all the shots, they can make the century breaks, they can clear the table, you know, put them on a practice table, and it's effortless. And then you put them into a different environment, and it can be completely the opposite. You can get to a point where anxiety starts to kick in because the brain isn't comfortable with what's going on. And they can get to a point where they don't even feel like they can pot a ball. Dan, that sounds crazy. But that's what can happen if you're in that big match situation live on television. Ordinarily, I would say hundreds and maybe a few thousand people watching, but currently that's not happening because of obvious reasons. But when all of those things are being experienced by the brain, then players can feel different. And when they feel different, they're going to perform in a different way. So being calm, being within your comfort zone, enjoying that moment, enjoying that experience is ultimately where you're trying to get to, so that then you can start to perform like you do in practice. That's the goal. And there are certain things you can do with the subconscious to program it to help you to keep you within that comfort state, if you like.
So is this what players are doing during the course of this? I mean, obviously they have these obstacles, these problems. Are they actually training the brains themselves? Are they training all the time when they're playing? Are they helping themselves all the time, or are they just simply not addressing the problems all the time? What's going on?
Well, it's a double approach, Dave. There's something called, and something that I've developed over the years, called neural rewiring, and it's a process. It's a 7-step process for players to be able to rewire their subconscious, a little bit like a computer. Your brain works very similar to a computer. You know, a computer needs software, and whatever software is in that computer, it will run that program. Right, and the brain works very similar. Software in a computer is, you know, you can type and create software through programming. The brain's programming is basically repetition through what we call neural connections. Every time you repeat something technically, every time you repeat something mentally, your brain starts to wire these things into the subconscious part of the brain through repetition. And certain things then start to become a habit, a little bit like how you learn to walk. You get to a certain point through repetition. Now you don't have to think about how to walk. You just do it. You learn to ride a bike. Once you've done that, you've got some software through repetition. You can now ride that bike. Driving a car can be quite frustrating in the beginning when you're learning to drive a car, because it's multitasking, feet, hands. You're doing many different things. But it's incredible through repetition, and you create this little piece of software in the brain for driving the car. Then that piece of software will now drive that car for you without you even thinking about it. And you can literally get from one point to another within, let's say, an hour, and not really remember most of that journey, which is a bit spooky, but that's what happens. So what we're doing with neural rewiring is we're creating the two majors. Self-belief, which is huge. You genuinely have to believe that what you're attempting to achieve is possible for you. Now, the great thing about the subconscious is it doesn't know the difference between fantasy and reality. It thinks it's all. So what information you keep giving to your brain, it starts to take it as fact. And you can create a very high level of self-belief about yourself. Even though it might not be factually true, your brain perceives it to be true, and therefore you feel in that way because of that belief.
So players have got to apply all these things on the table. It's not an easy thing to do, Chris, for a lot of these guys to apply.
Let me just stop you there. This is the neural rewiring is nothing to do with when you're playing snooker. This is pre-match. This is between tournaments. This is rewiring your brain in preparation for the match.
Mm-hmm.
When you get into the match, now you've got to be very good at focusing on those 2 or 3 little elements that help you to perform at your best, whether it's a swing thought, whether it's attempting to stay calm, whether it's having a certain strategy, 2 or 3 little things. While your subconscious is now running with some good software, you're now focusing on only 2 or 3 little things that you're going to be really nailing on that particular day to give you that performance. You can't be thinking too much. Ultimately, you're going to play at your best, Dave, when you're not really thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
When you are playing at your best, in sports psychology, they call it playing within the zone, in the zone state. And that basically means the software that you've created through repetition is now running without the conscious brain really doing too much. So you're trying to get onto this autopilot level, if you like, to perform at your best. But to do that, what we now know in neuroscience is that the brain has to be in a certain brainwave state called alpha to allow the software to communicate with the physical body, all the muscles, in a flawless way. And if the brain isn't in alpha, which basically means calm, if it's frustrated, if it's angry, if it's anxious, it now goes into what's called beta brainwave state, which is a faster brainwave state. And that basically now means that this software is struggling to communicate with the physical body. And then the conscious part of the brain has to get involved. So a player now has to start to think about what they're doing. They might start to think about their grip. They might start to think about their stance. They might start to think about their bridge. And when that happens, we call that conflict. You're consciously trying to override the habit, which is still firing. Now you're in serious trouble because you've got conflict going on and there's 2 messages trying to get to the same point. And it's confusing for the system to deal with.
The players can't think about too much, though, Chris. I mean, they can think too much in a lot of respects too. Players are perhaps maybe trying to change their game or trying to deal with situations, pressure on the table, and making some changes to their games, and that perspective. Yet maybe from the subconscious point of view, they can prepare themselves differently, and then apply that on the day when they go. Yeah. I mean, it's probably a slow process. It's probably in terms of the players preparing themselves and thinking about the subconscious and the areas, and that's just touch on snooker here. But some of the guys might be thinking, what is this? What is this here? Is this psychology, education here? What's going on here? But the thing is, when they're on the table, the guys, obviously the guys know what they have to do. As you say, they're all capable of scoring heavy. They're all capable of hitting 147s. Scoring really heavy, hitting 100 breaks and what have you, but it's applying that on the table on the day. I mean, is that the difference between the players at the top and the players at the bottom? What we're talking about here, in terms of applying themselves and the subconscious and thinking about getting all those things right. Is that the difference between the guys at the top and the players at the bottom?
I think so, Dave. I think the guys at the top, let's say currently, are the guys that seem to be able to do it when it matters more often. That's basically the difference. But of course, playing in these match environments on television on a regular basis, you do start to get a little bit more comfortable with that. So, but what I would say is that in today's world of snooker is that the lower ranked players are getting much more opportunity to compete against these top players, and therefore their comfort zones are going to be affected, because when you spend time around people on a regular basis, you get more comfortable with that. But being out in that match arena, for the first few times can be, well, not easy to deal with. Let's just say that. So it's about being able to do it when it matters, and that's why these guys, what they're doing is fantastic, Dave. It's a high skill sport. This is not an easy sport, and to go out there in that arena, live on television, and do what they do, fantastic. It takes some doing, but ultimately, I would say self-discipline is a very big thing. You don't allow the kicks and the bounces and the bad luck to affect you too much. You've got to learn to deal with it in a neutral way. And, you know, don't allow yourself to get too annoyed and frustrated and with these things, because if you do, you're going to go into beta and you're going to struggle because you're not in the right emotional state to perform. So self-discipline, I would say, is a big factor.
And this is a great opportune moment to bring a man of great discipline onto the screen here, Fergal O'Brien. I'm going to bring him on here. Unless I've cut him loose. Oh, you're there. Fergal, can you hear us all right? I'm going to unmute you. Hang on. I know you've got a Southern Irish accent, but it's no reason to mute you. I've got a cheek to talk about, Fergal. I know. I've got a cheek to talk.
Listen, I'm between the north and the south here. I've got to be very careful, haven't I?
You better be very, very careful what you're saying here. Me and Fergal, we've got lots of connections in Milton Keynes. You're probably not even there. You're Milton? No, you're not. Where are you? By the way?
No, I'm in Belgium.
I'm in Milton
Fergal
Keynes.
now? Where are you, Fergal?
Yeah, I'm in Milton Keynes.
Chris, you're safe. You're safe. You know, we're talking. Fergal, thanks for joining us, by the way. Thanks for taking the place.
Thank you.
Of another great player, Shaun Murphy, where we're talking, you know, Chris is obviously talking about something in quite some depth, really. I think when you talk about the psychological part of any professional sport, it's a very difficult thing to express that to players and to help them with it. It's probably easier with players at the top and players who listen, but Chris has obviously helped top players like Shaun Murphy. I mean, we were just touching on the differences between the players at the top and the players at the bottom, and you can see very clearly, you know, just like we've said. I mean, we look at John Higgins, we look at Ronnie, we look at Selby, and they seem to be able to refocus themselves very, very well. You know, Fergal, you refocused yourself very, very well to beat Mr. Selby a couple of days ago.
Thank you.
So it's always a great thing to do that there, you know, as an experience. But I mean, and by the way, guys, just in case you don't, some of you don't know, Chris and Fergal do actually work together quite a bit on that level, just like Shaun did. But no, it's just great to sort of talk about these things. But the players at the top and the players at the bottom, the guys at that top end, they're doing something right. They're winning their matches. They seem to have better temperaments. But you know, through the years, Fergal, you've been on the tour for such a long time. What is your take on this when it comes to, you know, this subconscious thing and how players should prepare themselves? What are your views on this?
Yeah, well, it's massive because, as Chris said, there's no player on the standard of play between the player ranked 1 and 128. You know, is little or nothing, and all those players have had, you know, many centuries, maximums, and all those things. But the top so more or less everybody's best game is very, very similar. But why the top players, the top ranked players, is because more consistently get their best game out. So a lower ranked player might do it 1 or 2 out of 10 matches. Top players are doing it 7 or 8. So obviously, if they're bringing their best game out, then as they're winning all matches, and obviously the more you win, the more confident you are, the more comfortable you are in those situations, particularly playing on TV in the main arena. And likewise, then also as a bonus, the more you win, then there's greater fear. Your opponents are more fearful of you. They're not as comfortable. You have a greater reputation, so that then can add to it as well. So the top players are thinking about winning, and the lower ranked players are thinking about the top players winning as well. Well, you can see how it can go.
And Fergal, just for got you on a bit of a roll there. You know, for the benefit of the young guys out there who are trying to get on the tour, those who are playing, the traveling to the venues, the nerves, the emotions, the preparation, the performance. You've been through all this. You've dealt with all of this. Mm-hmm. You know, just looking back over the years, I mean, when I look at a player like yourself, I see a player who's got of good temperament, who's dealt with all of this very, very well. You know, where do you think the young guys or the new players are going wrong, Fergal? Where do you think? I'll start off with you, and I'll go back to Chris again.
Well, it's hard to know without, you know, seeing, you know, or talking to each individual player. But one thing I will say, and I've said it to many young players, when you become on tour, playing snooker is the easy bit because you've trained for that, you've practiced for that, you've prepared for that to an extent. What you haven't really prepared for is the loneliness, the travel, the upheaval, you know, particularly if you're going to the likes of China, what that entails. You could be away in China for a week and you just maybe played one match and lost. So that can be a big thing to get adjustment to, and mentally to be in a good state of mind even when you're not playing. You know, you need good people around you, good advisors. And again, looking back over my career, there's probably too many years where I tried to effectively do it by myself. Whereas, you know, the more good people that you can have help me. So for argument's sake, if I was on my own and the night before a match I'm feeling a little bit nervous, which is totally understandable, instead of that becoming a bit of an issue and becoming really anxious with it, if you've somebody to talk to, and it could be your wife, it could be your friends, or for argument's sake, ringing Chris, and you could say, look, you know, I'm a little bit nervous about the match tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And instead of nearly being up all night worrying about the match and how it'll go, if you talk to somebody like Chris, and he can just repeat what he kind of said there, look, forget about the match. Firstly, go out and enjoy it. It's a great occasion. And what are the 2 or 3 things that you can do that can help you get the result that you want? And that's one thing myself and Chris have talked about a lot. But if I have a need to be in control, and we kind of nearly argue about whether you can control the result or not. And once you realize that and accept that you can't control the result, it's out of your control. But what's in my control is to do the 2 or 3 things that I tend to do when I play at my best. Do them, and nearly at the end of the match, don't ask, did I win or lose, but nearly ask, right, did I do the 3 things I wanted to do during the match? And if you did those and still lose, well, you can do no more. It's like wishing to be taller, but chances are, for most players, if you do those 2 or 3 different keys that make you at your best, if you nail those, you know, if not always, well, then the vast majority of times you will win.
Chris, you're and also, Chris, is it important who you talk to
before a match?
In any denomination here, Chris, because you can get too much pressure. You can speak to too many people. You can get a whole bundle of people putting you under pressure from, say, for example, peer pressures from your family, your friends, or, you know, you can get advice from your coach or from the guys you play with, other professionals you practice with. Is it important to get all that feedback, or should players be very careful as to the numbers of people they speak to or who they speak to?
Well, it's a good point, Dave. And snooker, like most sports, you've always got the experts that want to give you their advice and opinions, you know. And sometimes that advice isn't going to be helpful. So, yeah, you've got to be careful who you get that advice from and who you listen to, because ultimately, you know, you want to arrive at that snooker table in a very good state of mind and a very clear state of mind in terms of exactly what you're going to be focusing on. And one of the things that we do, one of the things that Fergal's doing, for example, he'll be listening to some things during the day and, you know, really getting his mind focused on these, as he mentioned earlier, those 2 or 3 little things that he can control, you know, and if he can do those 2 or 3 things particularly well, then he's going to get a high level of performance. And, you know, by the way, Dave, we're talking about a player here, Fergal O'Brien, that, you know, he's a player that's had 5 century breaks in a best of 11 match. Now you just think about that. 5 centuries in a best of 11 match. That is, and that's in the UK Championships against a top class opponent. I think it was Barry Hawkins, wasn't it, Fergal?
Yeah.
The most exciting he's ever done in his life.
You know, he's a ranking tournament winner, so he's done it. But that, for me, the 5 centuries in a best of 11 is mind-blowingly impressive, because, you know, what's required to do that in terms of discipline, focus, being in the right state, you know, all the elements have to come together. And when they do that, and Fergal will tell you, he probably wasn't really aware too much about that match, you know, and what happened. And all of a sudden he's realised he's made 3 or 4 tons, and then he's made another one. And because he's in the right state of mind, he's going to perform at his best. But just going back to what you said, you've got to be very very careful who you receive information from, advice from, opinions from, because people do want to help genuinely. Sometimes it's the opposite. They don't help. They'll give you some information that you could take on board, and later on you'd realise, well, actually, that's not really going to help me. And I would say certainly in that few hours before a match, keep yourself to yourself. Do your own little things, keep in your own little world, concentrate on the right things, and get to that match table in the right state of mind.
Very, very important points there, lads. Obviously, I think the reason why I touched on this issue with too many people getting involved with an individual pre-match is it can certainly have an effect on them. I mean, there's a lot of young professionals out there who have just got on the tour, and I'm pretty sure they're very nervous, and I'm pretty sure their families are putting a lot of pressure on them, and they have expectations to perform, but sometimes it can overwhelm them, Chris. It could be too much for them. So they've got to pack everything in when they go there. They've got to control themselves, deal with their emotions, deal with their stress, their anxiety, and any little nerves that they have there. So what would you say to them?
Well, what you're talking about there, Dave, is expectancy. When you put too much expectancy on something, especially something that you can't control, like a result, then you're going to create anxiety with players, because they're going out there wanting to get this result and expecting to get this result, and then all of a sudden, let's say their opponent is in one of those days where they're playing fantastic snooker, and it can very quickly swing around. So you've got to get your priorities right, and I work with some young golf players. In fact, I had a meeting a few days ago with a family whose son is a particularly talented golf player. He's only 18, but he's already an Orange Ball winner. And I said to the parents, your job, your parents. and one of the main things that you need to be doing as parents is that if your son doesn't perform very well, or he doesn't get a great result, your response to that boy is absolutely huge. And if you can deal with disappointment and success in a similar kind of way, and deal with your son in the same kind of way, and give him the same kind of attention, whether he's played well or not, is a huge thing. Because if you're the kind of people that reprimand people for not performing and playing well, then all you're doing is creating this fear of failure.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I don't do well here, I get this kind of response from the most important people in my life. And ultimately, as kids and as we grow up, we're trying to impress our parents, especially sons and fathers, for example. That's a very special relationship. So how parents respond to their kids, how friends and family respond to their siblings, etc., whether it's a successful performance or not, subconsciously this stuff goes in. And if these levels of expectancies are built too high and they're not being met, then it's disappointment. You lose your self-confidence. You can even get a little bit down and on the depressive road a little bit. And that's one thing that has been quite prevalent recently about the mental side of a game like snooker, and Fergal touched on it there. There's a lot of time where you're lonely in snooker. You're on your own. It's not easy. So you've got to be very good at. You've got to be very professional in what you do. Fergal, I would say, is one of the most professional snooker players you'll ever meet. He's very structured. He's very dedicated. He practices hard. He does all the right things all the time. He's incredible. I'm not just he's here, Dave.
Thinking.
He is. He's a professional sportsman. His dedication and his commitment is second to none.
Well, that's why he's on here.
Well,
Yeah, if I could just
Fergal,
touch on that point.
Ask you a question, Fergal, there. But when you were young and when you were growing up, what was it like with your parents and friends, and how did you experience that?
Yeah, they were great, and that's I was going to touch on that as well. Probably the worst thing, and I've seen it with other players, and probably the most detrimental, if the pressure that the parents and maybe families and maybe good friends, if that in any way imposes on a player, psychologically that's massive. But we could probably all give examples of players that you nearly would say they would have made it if they had a different father. Maybe the pressure they were putting on. You
Yeah.
don't for 1 second want to feel that your love from your parents is conditional, as in, you know, in black and white terms, if I win, they love me. If I don't, they won't. And that could happen from a young age when a kid walks into their, you know, their parents after doing an exam. You know, the result is the result. It doesn't change the fact that they're your son or daughter and they're your parents. So before a match, all you want is your mum and dad to wish you good luck. And after, win or lose, that there's no real, obviously they're delighted if you win and they're disappointed if you lose, but you should never feel in any way that you've let them down, because that's adding pressure. All you can do is go out and do your best. And whether you're number one in the world, or there's thousands and millions of people who never played snooker at any level and their parents still managed to love them. And there's plenty of people who never became world champion and their parents loved them, or Wimbledon champion, or, you know. So, and as a father as well, I would hate of my daughter in anything to do, whether it be college, playing the piano, in any way felt she was under pressure or had to do, you know, or my love was tied into her results. And I think that's crucial. And again, just talking about young players coming through, to be aware of that. And if needs be, maybe have to sit down and say to the parents, look, I am feeling a little bit of pressure. And if you are feeling pressure, your parents should be helping you get out of that trouble, rather than maybe, and they might you mightn't be aware of it, but they could actually be adding to the pressure. And likewise with friends, you know, they are parents, ultimately they're parents. It's like, if my daughter, I love her, I'd like to think I'm a good dad, but if she wants to play the piano, don't come to me, get the piano teacher, she'll help you, you know, or the snooker player, go to the coach, you know, or the tennis player, go to the coach. I might be a good dad, but I'm not also an expert on snooker, piano playing, million and one things. So it's important. You just want your parents to be your parents.
Yes.
And then other friends.
I would rather listen to your daughter playing the piano than watching you play snooker. Anyway, that was a very, very important point there that the guys have talked about there. So in terms of other people giving you advice and speaking to you in terms in that respect, very, very valid points there. I want to just slide across. I want to touch on something else. Same area here. The guys are on the table. This very often happens with the new professionals who have just got on the tour. They're on there, or anybody else, they're on there, and they're 2 or 3 frames behind in the best of 7. They're feeling the nerves. They're trying to refocus themselves. Now, the refocusing thing, Chris, is a big thing. It's a big problem. Mm-hmm. Players very often, when they're behind or they've had a little bit of bad luck, you know, and all the anxiety is just taking over them, man. It's just absolutely overwhelming them. How do they deal with that, guys? Chris?
Well, obviously they've got in the wrong state of mind. Interestingly, Dave, some players, when they do go 2 or 3 behind, can actually relax, you know, and, you know, it's almost, well, it's almost over this, so I'll just relax and play. And incredibly, that's when they start to play at their best, because they've stopped taking it too seriously, let's say. They relax and just play their normal game. But if you're in the wrong state, basically what's happening, Dave, is that there's certain chemicals in the brain that are firing. You've heard of the fight and flight syndrome. Well, there's fight, flight, and freeze. And when the subconscious brain sees or experiences something that it doesn't recognize, it's a little bit like our immune system, Dave. You know, our immune system is designed to detect things it doesn't recognize. And if it doesn't recognize them, it goes after them. It tries to get rid of them. And when the brain starts to recognize things it doesn't recognize, it starts to experience things it doesn't recognize, it fires alarm bells. You know, and the certain chemicals start to fire. And you can feel terrible, Fergal. Is that correct? You can feel literally afraid, fearful, like you've just seen a wild lion just walk past you, or whatever it might be, because things like epinephrine, noradrenaline, cortisol, and these chemicals and neuropeptides that are being fired in response to a situation going on now puts a player in completely the wrong state. Now, you watch people like Tiger Woods, for example, in golf, and I've met Tiger on a number of occasions through working with some of the professional golf players. And he uses what's called the Tiger 10. And he gives himself 10 seconds to have a little blast out. You've got to change the chemical structure of what's going on. You've got to change the chemicals. If you don't, you'll stay in that same state and you'll feel the same way, and your performance level will still be low. So you've got to find a way to change the chemical structure. And something that we use is catharsis. Out to the toilet. You've got yourself a nice little 10-second blast now, and you're going to do 2 or 3 things specifically to help you to change that chemical input in your brain to quickly turn that around and get you into a different state. You've got to find a way to get out of that situation. So, yeah, there are some things you can do. I wouldn't say necessarily in the arena. You couldn't start doing this kind of thing in the arena. You know, get out of there, get into another little area, get yourself removed from the situation that's causing the anxiety, let's say, and look to recover and get back into a better state.
A lot of young players are dealing with obviously it's a completely different situation at the moment with COVID, because players are sort of locked into it. They're in a bubble. There's no crowds, so it's going to have a different psychological effect on all of them in that respect. You know, in terms of, goodness me, there's nobody up there. It's just me and him and the referee, and we're having to get our own rests. And this is an extraordinary situation here, you know. And so perhaps that for some players that'll be okay. For maybe some players, probably players at the top who love a crowd, big following, that could be completely different.
I think Fergal, you can talk about that.
Yes, I think on the table for the younger players coming through, I think not having the crowds is an advantage, because again, okay, most of their matches coming through, there wasn't big crowds, and they certainly were on television, and you would often see players, not just necessarily young players, but players that may be doing very well in qualifying, winning a lot of matches, and then through those results they go to play, for argument's sake, Ronnie O'Sullivan, you know, Wednesday night live on TV, and they don't perform anywhere near what they can do or what they have been doing. And they're so out of their comfort zone because all of a sudden they do have to contend with this massive crowd, being analysed not just by the commentators in the studio, but also by, you know, the millions watching at home, you know, including their family and friends. So if anything, you know, not having the crowd, you know, and just being in the qualifiers probably makes it a little bit easier. However, these COVID restrictions and bubble does probably make it harder for them off the table, because I said, you know, well, all going well, if you do well enough in your results, you know, you could be here till, you know, mid to end December. So whilst obviously that's great if, you know, you're winning matches and getting results, but that's a lot of time, as I said, on your own. And normally at tournaments, like normally Chris would be over at these tournaments, but he can't because, you know, so many players here, you're not allowed to bring a guest. So as I said, with regard to loneliness, a great advice for young players, if you've got a good friend, somebody you're very comfortable with, could well be a coach, mightn't be, that is at the tournament, you've somebody to talk to switch off. So as I said, if somebody, even if it's just watching the football match or watching the telly, you can relax with or going for meals with, who also might be another player. And then somebody just to talk to and switch off. And if you're struggling, you have somebody to talk to, but we don't have that at the moment. And you can't even really go out to other restaurants, you know, so you're probably in your room, with the exception of a match of practice, you effectively might feel like you're stuck in your room. So that's obviously important that through, you know, well, technology now and phones, to be in touch with people, because you don't normally have that support system, you know, at hand.
That's a great point. I mean, I just, you know, I think it doesn't have to be a coach. It doesn't have to be a coach. It could be a friend. It could be a partner, a colleague who helps you. And I think
somebody who makes you laugh.
Mark Allen's Kyle that travels with Mark Allen. As far as I know, Kyle is not a technician or a professional coach, but he helps Mark in so many different ways. You know, he communicates with Mark, a very, very good friend of Mark's. He's a great guy, by the way. I've spoken to Kyle loads of times. He's a great lad, and so he helps Mark. Mark is at the top, as we've seen at the moment, but there is that relationship between them. And perhaps it's not maybe the kind of relationship that maybe Chris would have with another player in terms as a psychological coach. But in a lot of ways he is. In a lot of ways, Chris, perhaps Kyle is that psychological element that's helping Mark in his game?
Well, absolutely. And as we said before, Dave, you know, the emotional side of things has the biggest impact on performance. So if Kyle's helping Mark emotionally, generally, and as Fergal said, it's not just about snooker, it's about life. You know, just being happier in everything that he's doing, having somebody around that he gets on with. Like you said, Fergal, making him laugh, having a good giggle. Well, that's the best thing you can do in these times of COVID. You've got to find ways to get yourself in a positive state. You know, watch comedies, watch things that make you laugh. You know, watch less news. It's usually mostly bad news. You know, we don't need all this bad news all the time in our brains. It's not going to help. And as we always say, if something's important enough, there's going to be a few people that are going to tell you about it anyway. But you know, he's doing a great. You know, you've got a few players like, for example, I think Kyron Wilson has his brother. Judd Trump had his brother around. You know, and I think they've got some knowledge on snooker as well, obviously. But generally, it's to help them with their emotional states, to help them feel better generally, because it's all about balance. If you're feeling better generally, it will affect your snooker.
It's very interesting that I met Karen's brother 2 weeks ago in Northampton. I've just started running events there, and I just looked at him on a rack because they're so much alike physically.
Yeah.
you know straight away. And I just went over and I said, "You must be Kyle's Karen's brother." He says, "Yeah." And I watched him play snooker. I'm not sure he was playing snooker with his father or whatever, but he's quite an adept snooker player, actually. He's quite a good snooker player, and we're taking the game very, very seriously. But yes, no, you can see that combination where you maybe a friend or a family member can help in so many different ways.
Sure.
Actually dealing with all the things that can go wrong out there. And again, guys, very, very important points. You know, very important all around. And by the way, guys, if you're watching this, just click on the like button or the thumbs up. Let us know you're here. We've got some people on there with some queries already, and we'll get to them in due course. But just let us know you're here. Click the little thumbs up button so I can see your names popping up in that respect. So we've touched on these things, these important things so far, and we're not going to cover everything here, otherwise we'll be here to midnight, you know. And it's bad enough watching Fergal on the table and talking to Chris on the phone without me spending more than an hour and a half on here, boys. You know what I mean? Okay. But what we're going to talk about now, we're going to talk about anger. Okay? We're going to talk about anger. I get angry, Chris.
That's not right, Dave. That's not like you, is it?
I get angry, Chris. I get angry when I watch the lads get angry on the table. A lot of my top amateurs, I see them do things and I don't like it. I don't like what they're doing, Chris. I'm going to touch on a couple of things, by the way, before I let you rip. All right?
Sure.
You know, some of them are giving off at their opponents.
Yeah.
Some of them are taking it out on their opponents. Some of them are taking it out on the table. They're hitting the ball off a table with a stick. I don't tolerate that, by the way. You only get one chance at that, and then you're off the events. You know, throwing your cue, walking out. They wouldn't do that on a tour, would they? You know, so anger and frustration can bring upon many, many different problems. Okay?
Sure.
Okay, we have the perfect example was displayed just a few days ago when Ronnie took his frustrations out on Mark Allen.
Yeah.
Very, very clearly did. Mark did nothing wrong. The referee confirmed it. You know, but look, this happens. I'm not just picking on Ronnie. There's a lot of other players that do this. There's a lot of amateurs that do it. Okay? So the anger and the frustration here, Chris, let's touch on this. Okay? I want to know what these players can do about this. The young guys out there who are coming through, very talented. They've got lots of talent, and they're going to do very well. But there's a big, big problem. The frustration and the anger is holding them back. How do they sort that out?
Well, it's a very good point. That takes me back to 2015 when I was contacted by professional golf players management, Rafa Cabrera, and you know, anger it's a funny one. There's different reasons why people get angry. You know, embarrassment is one point. When you're getting embarrassed in a certain situation, you can get angry and frustrated. When you set yourself high targets and levels of expectancy, and you're not matching those levels of expectancy, that can cause anger and frustration. Rafa, back in 2015, Rafa Cabrabeo was an angry person because he wasn't performing. He wasn't able to get over the line. So we had to look at ways to help him to deal with these things. And first of all, you've got to help somebody to understand why it happens. Because a lot of the reasons for anger is it's a reaction. And players, before they even realize, they've reacted and got angry and frustrated. Okay. It's a response to a certain situation. So again, it becomes a subconscious thing to help them to deal with it in a more neutral and responsible way. Responsibility is a great word. The ability to respond, and the ability to respond in the right way is such a key thing in sport. And certainly taking it out on your opponent is not going to work, is it? I mean, that's just a lack of respect, in my opinion. You mentioned the Ronnie O'Sullivan, Mark Allen situation the other day, and if Ronnie had been in the right state, when you're in the right state, and Fergal confirmed this, you don't even see your opponent. You don't even see the crowd. It's all being filtered out. And if you're in the wrong state of mind, all these things you start to see and recognize them. Right? And probably Ronnie was looking for things at that point. He was looking for something to have a go about. He was in that mood, if you like. And it just happened to be Mark Allen at that time. And I know Mark Allen personally, he won't have that. He's a strong-minded person. And how he dealt with that situation, I thought was fantastic. He sat in his chair, just kept nice and chilled, nice and calm. Ronnie tripped himself up because now, of course, Ronnie, because of his anger and frustration at Mark, is now in the wrong state of mind to perform. And would you believe it, 3 or 4 shots later, he missed a very straightforward red. And as Mark said after the match in his interview, he said there was no way I was going to miss then. So now what he's done is given him huge motivation, which has now helped his concentration, and he's really knuckled down and made sure that, he did what he had to do. So anger and frustration is never... There is one benefit to anger, Dave, for a few minutes. It takes away fear. When you get angry about something, the fear of it disappears, right? But it doesn't last very long generally. A player will go back into their normal state within minutes after the anger. So it can help in a very short space of time, getting angry and frustrated, because the fear factor is relieved, but it doesn't last very, very long. And the fact of it is, when you're angry and frustrated, you're in the beta brainwave state, and that is not optimum to allow this software to communicate with the body to perform at its best. So self-discipline then, you've got to be very disciplined and make a decision before the match. I'm not going to let things upset me. I'm not going to let my opponent upset me. I'm not going to allow the referee, if he makes one or two, or she makes one or two decisions that I don't like, it's not going to get inside my bubble. You've got to set your stall out for this stuff. Prepare for it, and be ready for it for when it happens. We call that a pre-mortem. You've heard of a post-mortem. We do a pre-mortem where we prepare for these things, and we prepare ready for when they happen. This is how we're going to deal with it. And we're not going to let things get inside of our bubble that are going to allow us to get in the wrong state to perform at our best. You've got to be disciplined, and it's not easy. But like I said, you've got to program the subconscious a little bit as well to deal with it better for you on your behalf, if you like. What's your thought on that, Fergal? I mean, by the way, Fergal probably has one of the best temperaments in professional sport.
Don't praise him too much. His head will explode.
How proud that would you, Dave?
By the way, Dave, this is typically not a British thing. When we do something good, we don't hear a damn word. When we do something poorly, everybody's on your back.
That's right.
The number one reason why people quit their job, Dave, is because they're not being treated the right way. When they do a poor job, it's everybody's on their back. And when they do something really good, they almost never hear anything from anybody.
True.
So
True.
we're British. Well, I mean, Fergal's Irish. Now,
Don't
I
hold it against them. Don't hold it against them.
I can talk about the Irish because my mother was Sheila Malone. And the Henrys are all from Mayo. So I'm sorry, Dave, I'm from the southern part as well.
Listen, there's only two real
You can
Irish.
drink like an Irishman as well.
There's only two real Irishmen here, and you're not one of them. Fergal, let's get over to you because you're very important. As much as you're not very exciting, you are very, very important to me. Okay? So we were talking about anger and frustration.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, obviously, yeah. Obviously, you're trying as much as possible, obviously, not to be angry and frustrated. Because as Chris said, for a few seconds, if you get angry, so you can kind of maybe get rid of that, you've changed your emotion. But you look at anybody that's ever played at their very best in any sport, if they've broken any records, played the best game of tennis, the best round of golf, the best snooker performances, they never ever got annoyed during it. So, as Chris is saying, the calmer you are and more focused on the job in hand you are, the better your chance are to perform. And obviously, if you're angry and distracted by the crowd, the referee, your opponent, the TV, what other people are thinking, a million and one things, you're less likely to perform at your best. And obviously, anger and frustration. And snooker can be a very frustrating game, but it's not easy. But as much as possible, if you have the self-discipline to try and keep it in check, to play at your best, but also the more annoyed you get, you're also playing your hand to your opponent. So apart from reducing your own chances of playing, you've also given your opponent to lose because, as I said, if somebody's playing their very best, there's little or no emotion out of them. So if on the flip side, if they're banging the table or throwing their cue around, you know that they're not at their happiest, that they're frustrated, they're not playing their best or in the best frame of mind. So you're also giving your opponent confidence as well because they're picking up on those signs as well. So there's no merit at all in getting angry, frustrated. And look, that's very, very easy to say, but that's a challenge every time you go out to play. Because just because you've kept your emotions in check for a week, that's not to say on the 8th day, as I said, something might happen with your opponent, something out of the ordinary could happen. Somebody could say something to you backstage just before you play. It could be anything that you maybe haven't dealt with before. So to keep those emotions in check isn't easy, even if you have this knowledge we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good points. Another issue here. Covered a few things. So I get a bit of an echo here. Turn your radio off, whoever it is. When players decide to make changes to their games, now whether it be their cue action or whether it be many other differences, the way they approach their shots or making decisions on whether they're going to play a less attacking game of snooker. I wanted to ask the both of you, how do they deal with this? I mean, Chris, you talk about routines in some parts of your processing.
Yeah.
When you're discussing with players, how important routines are. Preparation, subconscious building, in that respect. But when players are trying to change their games, whether it be cue actions or refocusing, or in ways that they can raise their performance, what are they thinking, and what should they be thinking about, and what ways can they think in order to help themselves? Chris?
Well, I think the first thing before you start to change anything, you've got to find out and establish, is there a good reason to change? And that's the first point, because a lot of sports people tend to try and make changes for some reason that actually doesn't make any sense. So you've got to establish, if you're going to make some changes to your game, let's talk about technique, for example. If you're going to start playing around with your technique, you've got to be very careful, because what you've currently got is a habit of mechanics that are firing. And if you're going to start trying to do something different, well, first of all, it's going to take you months and months and months of consistent, effective repetition to make that change habitually, which is ultimately the key, Dave. We're trying to create good habits, because it's habits that are going to control you in those pressure situations. So you've got to create good habits technically, mechanically, but also visually. So some players, for example, have got issues mechanically. Some players have got issues visually. Some players have got a bit of both. You know, maybe Fergal can touch on one or two things that he's been doing over this last couple of years, which is not necessarily a mechanical change, but for Fergal, he's made more of a visual change in terms of where he's addressing the cue ball, etc., which then, of course, has an effect on where he's aiming to the object ball. But I think the first thing in terms of change is establishing, is there a good reason to make a change, and then establishing what is the correct process to bring on a better improvement, an improvement that will eventually be better than the previous way you're performing.
Yeah, I think that's the crucial point. Only make a change if you think it's going to make you better, as opposed to just making a change. You want to make a change to do something better. You don't want to make a change to do something different. So if I can play a shot 10 out of 10, and say Chris is watching me, and I get a 10 out of 10, he's not going to ask me to change anything because I'm doing a 10 out of 10. However, if I approach Chris with a shot, maybe I only get 3 out of 10, or maybe Chris has spotted something himself. If I say to Chris, this shot comes up, I'm not particularly strong on it, what do you think? And I play it, I probably wouldn't have to play it certainly any more than 3 times. And Chris would probably come up with a suggestion, says, we always played it like that. Yeah, that's how I do it. And have you noticed you've maybe missed to one side of the pocket or whatever the error is? And it's okay, try this. And you might, usually when it may be the first go, but then once or twice you try that, it might feel initially a little bit uncomfortable. But through that little bit of practice, and it could be a couple of shots, it could be 10 shots, and certainly maybe a little bit more practice. But all of a sudden, the shot that was, I would say, was getting 3 out of 10, by making that change, which made me better, and now putting the shot 7, 8 out of 10. So that was a reason to make a change, because that shot, which was a weakness, if we call it 3 out of 10 a weakness, I've made a change, done something different. Now it felt different, but because it's something new. But the results were good. So obviously then the more you practice, it becomes a better habit. That's a reason to make a change. I've turned a weakness into a strength through good advice, or I'm doing something that I couldn't see myself. But just a change to do something different doesn't make any sense. You know, if there's 1,000 shots in the game of snooker, for argument's sake, and you can play 900, and if you change your cue action, it takes months. Now you could play all 1,000. Well, that's made you better. But to find a different way to play the 900 shots you can already play brilliantly, makes no sense at all.
I don't see a lot of changes. I think you've just hit it on the head there. There's times when it's unnecessary for a player at the top to make changes. I can have the reverse effect, perhaps maybe in some respects, and it's probably a very, very lengthy process psychologically for a player to adjust to a new routine or a new cue action, for example, Chris, or a style of play. I mean, I was watching quite a lot of you guys actually, or for you, Fergal, playing there a couple of days ago on some of the live streams, and I watched young Luca Brecel, and I noticed. I mean, Luca, I was actually very, very impressed with Luca. I didn't think he played that well in his qualifier, but I think he was playing James Cahill actually.
Yeah.
And I was very impressed with Luca because I noticed something that he's slight changed. He's actually given himself a few more seconds.
Okay.
And it's really weird because he's very quick and he goes in. He's obviously a very, very talented young player. And I'm very fond of the kid, but he just, for a couple of those frames, he actually took his time over the shots. And I thought, this is very strange. Has he been speaking to someone? He just seems to he's just given it a few more seconds, and he won those frames very comfortably. By the way, and then towards the end of the match, I think it got to 4 each, and he won the last frame. It was a little bit scrappy, but he actually sort of semi got back to normal again, where he's quite a fast player, So you notice changes, but the point I'm getting at is that I think, Chris, I'll go to you on this one, is that the players are making changes like that where they're maybe giving themselves a little bit more time over the shot. I mean, surely that's a good example and a good way to sort of look at it.
Well, I would say that if a player was the kind of player that's rushing and not giving himself enough time, then that would be a good thing. Look at somebody like Fergal, for example. You know, his shot time on average this week has been 25 seconds, right? Now, what Fergal's been, you know, we can maybe talk about this Fergal a little bit, but in golf and snooker, Dave, we talk about what's called instinct time frame. So, for example, at golf, you know, I've done some work with Lee Westwood. And one of the things that Lee was doing over a putt, what he would do is he'd have his ball here and he puts his putter face to the ball. And literally at that point, he was standing there for about another 6 or 7 seconds. Now, the only thing that can potentially start to happen in my mind there is doubt. Because if you start to take too long over something, you don't need to take too long over. The potential is to start doubting. And if you start to doubt, you start to get a little bit of anxiety kicking in as well, which then can cause some muscle tension. You know, when that muscle tension kicks in, a player generally blames their technique for the problem. So instinct time frame is huge. And one of the things that Fergal's been working on is by the time he gets round to the cue ball, he's looking to be assessing the table on the way around with the goal that by the time he gets to the cue ball, instinctively now he knows which is the right shot. He trusts that and he goes. And I'd say that's been one of Fergal's weaknesses in certain situations. He can start to take too long over things. He can start to overthink. Okay, and not really trusting himself to be able to do what's required. But I would say in these last sort of few matches, he's done very well in the fact that he's not overthinking. He's being a little bit more spontaneous, a bit more instinctive, a bit more intuitive. So, yeah, composure is a very important thing. Shaun Murphy, unfortunately couldn't make it tonight. He's the kind of player that he can get a little bit too quick as well. And, he's using one or two things to help him be a little bit more composed around the table. Getting to the shot, being very specific, and doing what's required. So it's a fine line. You don't want to be too quick, but you also don't want to be too slow either. And you've got to find that balance.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point. It's a great point Chris made there. And as I was saying, at the start, with regard to the difference between winning and just the process of doing the things you can, and that's one thing that's always found a challenge with snooker. That the more you want to win or to increase your chances of winning, when you get out to play, the less you think about winning, the better. Which sounds a bit contradictory, but if we take, I'm surprised I haven't mentioned yet, but if we take the frame I had with Dave Gilbert to qualify, we used that as an example. Obviously, that was a bit extreme.
Dave, do we want
to torture?
I'm just using that as an example of somebody. If I'm totally focused on the result, fear of losing, trying to control a situation, desperate to win, fearful of losing. That's why, of course, then that also brings doubt, anxiety, careful, fearfulness, or whatever. But if we take it on the flip side, if we use the match of having the 5 centuries, I wasn't thinking about winning at all. I was just literally totally in the zone of shot after shot. And obviously my average shot time was probably maybe even early 20s as such. And I was just engrossed in doing the job in hand. And even when I look back at the match, if you ask me what was I thinking, I wasn't thinking of anything. Whereas again, in the Dave Gilbert match, I was thinking a million and one things. So, and that's the same guy who had 5 centuries in six frames also had, the longest frame ever. So that just shows the power of the mind and also the awareness of the mind. And as I said earlier, which is the contradiction, the more you focus on the process, you're more likely to win. But all your practice, all your training, your visualization, everything you do is to try and win. You come to a tournament to win. And it's then very hard nearly to flip a switch in the match and go, look, I really want to win. So I'm going to forget about winning and put my mind on these 2 or 3 things I need to do to give myself the best chance. And I said, that's the challenge for the game. And as I said, there is players, if we say there's been times that maybe took a bit longer than necessary. There's also been players, Tony Drago might be a classic example. he was fantastic to watch. But if you're nearly to sum up Tony's career, you would say, God, if only he'd have took an extra couple of seconds, maybe not in every shot, but on some shots, I'm convinced he would have done better, because maybe under pressure, he rushed a couple of shots. That extra second or two that you're talking, maybe that Luca now has brought, would have helped his game.
He rushes everything. You should see the way he used to eat his dinners. He used to go like,
he's a great guy, Tony. But you're thinking maybe for a guy with that talent, a couple of seconds on certain shots could have made a difference in him.
Absolutely perfect examples there, guys. If you're listening to this, we've got Chris, we've got Fergal. We're talking about everything here. It's getting very psychological. I thought by this time Chris would have given me a headache, but I'm actually feel quite good. You know, I've been drinking the same glass of wine, by the way.
Happy birthday, Dave.
Happy birthday, Dave.
I don't feel, look, I'm 43 and I don't feel my age. You know, I don't feel my age.
You look it.
No. But yes, no, very valid points. Right now, I'm going to talk about another thing here. I know we're running a bit low on time here, guys, but we're covering lots of subjects. I want to talk to you about routines, okay? Now, every professional snooker player, I'm sure, has a routine, a solo routine or a practice routine with another player. And a lot of the young guys who have got on the tour, a lot of top amateurs who are trying to make it, they're thinking of routines and how they apply them. And the discipline is also a big part here. So, Chris, how important is a routine and how should a player apply himself? Psychologically.
Yeah, there's different kinds of routines. You know, we use probably around about 30 different on-table shot routines in terms of playing shots. For example, long potting, safety, cue ball control, positional play, break building, playing from, rest, all these different things. And basically what they're for is to create what we call templates. So the brain starts to recognize all these things happening on a snooker table. In other words, you're going to feel more comfortable performing those tasks. But there's also what's called a pre-shot routine, which Fergal will, I'm sure he'll give you some information on this, because he's a very big believer in being, very repetitive in what you do. So pre-shot routine is basically a few different things you're going to implement that means you're doing the same things over and over. And Fergal talked about that before, repetition, and being consistently doing the right things and being focused only on those things in what we call shot tight compartments. It's one shot at a time. You haven't got the next shot yet, and the last one's already gone. So your focus in your mind has to be purely on this shot, just like in golf, because snooker and golf are pretty similar. They're dead ball sports. The ball's not moving. You've got a lot of time to consider things. Your focus has to be on one shot. We're going to pop that red. We're going to stun it for the black. End of story. And once you've done that task, you're now going to run your routine in terms of by the time you've hit the ball for the next time, you're now really only focusing on one shot at a time. And that's the ultimate goal, but not the easiest task to implement, as Fergal's going to talk about maybe as well. So it's routines are very important because it creates consistency. And ultimately, as a professional sports person, you want to be performing at your best on as consistent a base as possible. And routines help you to achieve that.
Yeah, I think with regard to the first routine, I would say advise young players, semi-players, professionals, or people looking to be professional. I think the majority of your practice should be against, other players. Ideally, maybe a little bit better than you. So as opposed to beating some fella in the club who you could give 30 or 40 start to beating him 5-0 and thinking you're great, you'll actually be much better, playing somebody and even losing 5-0, because it's going to raise your standard. You're going to learn from their game, but also whatever mistakes you make will be punished. So when you even do go and practice on your own, it's been highlighted, for argument's sake, God, my safety play wasn't good because he kept putting long balls. So even when you go to practice on your solo practice, it's going to be more relevant because areas in your game that need work have been highlighted. So you might have a day or two on them, working in them. You would also have done some technical work, like some long putting and those kind of things. Maybe you might have a day technical stuff and a day playing specific shots that need work, and then you go and play people again. That's like, for argument's sake, it's like even me the last few months, certainly going up to Northern Ireland, to Antrim, to play with Jordan, Brown, and also Mark Gallen, and particularly last year or so, some of the stuff Mark Gallen has been playing is fantastic. So it feels like he did very little wrong, and he could beat you 6-1. But those little mistakes are half a mistakes. If you keep getting punished, if you keep making a break of 50 or 60, and your opponent comes in and clears up, eventually you stop missing on 50 or 60 because you're aware of the importance, and you don't lose concentration, and then you continue because you realize if you want to compete, you would then have to play at that standard. So your mistakes are being highlighted. And likewise, if I have a couple of days playing Mark, and even if I lose, when I go back to Dublin for a few days practice, you'll generally find my practice that little bit better and sharper, because I know I have to improve to be competing with the likes of, and not just Marcus, it's Jordan Brown be playing. Some days he played fantastic stuff as well. So Jordan will be beating me. So I might go up there and if Mark beats me on Monday and Jordan beats me on Tuesday, well, you can be sure on Wednesday my practice on my own is going to be very good and very focused on specific areas I need to work on. And then for regard to routine, it's similar to actually playing. It's similar to what we're saying, that if you keep to your Tony Drago and you normally take 17 seconds in practice, ideally you should take 17 in a match. And if you're me and you take 25 seconds in practice, that's not the issue. It's that ideally in the match you're taking 25, or maybe if it's 25, maybe 23 to 27. There's a little bit of wriggle room, but if you're taking a bit too long or a bit too quick, well, then you've slipped out of your routine, so you're not going to be as consistent. In order to get consistent results, you have to do things consistently. So that's important as well. Everybody has their own style and their own style and their own routine, and it's important within that confine, and not necessarily just go a little bit quicker just because you've seen Ronnie O'Sullivan do it on telly and it looks fantastic. That works for him, so you have to find your own way. Basically, the way you play in practice, as much as possible, try and repeat that same routine in matches. But that's easier said than done.
While we're touching on this we're going to talk about weaknesses. Players use routines to sort out those weaknesses. Okay, so I mean this is a very, very important thing, and I feel a lot of my top amateurs probably don't do this. A lot of top professionals may do this. Perhaps maybe they'll work on their things with great discipline, but a lot of my top amateurs who play in my competitions, they don't look at their weaknesses. How important is it in a routine? Is it for a player to work on his weaknesses, Chris?
Absolutely. Like we said before, you've got to identify what they are. That's the first thing you've got to do. There's 4 stages of learning, Dave. Unconsciously incompetent. So that's somebody who doesn't know, and they don't know they don't know. If you can follow that. They don't know it, but they don't know they don't know.
I understand. Might be a bit too quick for Fergal there, but I'm okay.
Let me push you forward here. Hold on.
Sorry, I've had 2 glasses of wine now. I'm going to work on Fergal.
As long as you haven't had the Jameson.
Carry on.
So somebody who's not aware of their problems, that can be a major problem. So you've got to establish if there is a problem, what is it? So you take them from unconsciously incompetent to consciously incompetent. Now you know there's a problem. And the goal then is to use the right information and repetition to improve that problem. And that's the important thing, Dave, because every time you repeat something, you're creating these neural connections in your brain, and you are training your brain to do it by habit. And if you're doing it the wrong way, your brain will reproduce that program. So you've got to have and use things that will help you to develop the right habit. So from consciously incompetent, you now start to do it consciously competent. Now you start to consciously do it the right way through repetition. And with repetition over time, you become eventually, like most of these professional snooker players, unconsciously competent. Now you're doing it the right way without having to think about it, but it's only the correct repetition over time that has got you to that point. So improving weaknesses are, especially at the professional level, it's critical because it's these small, increases of performance or small increases of percentages that can make a big difference. So, if you're not a very particularly a good long potter, for example, let's imagine your long game isn't very good. Well, the first thing you've got to do is establish what is the problem. Are you not striking the cue ball accurately? Or are you not aiming the shot correctly now? And that's a big point, by the way, because most players are not aware that they're actually aiming to miss certain shots because they can't see the problem. And the reason for that is your visual cortex, because you don't see with your eyes, you see with your brain, and you start to see by habit. And some players, and I can give you an example of that, would be Mark Selby. We started to do some work back in June, and he was actually aiming to miss certain long pots, but he was believing that it was a technical problem. Now, it's very important to establish that that's not the case. And we're not going to start playing with your technique. What we're going to do is adjust your visual on a particular kind of shot so that it starts to look correct through repetition. So it's so important to find out what the weaknesses are, but implement the right repetition to improve that weakness by habit.
Fergal?
Yeah, that's crucial. If you improve your weaknesses, you'll improve your game. But we tend to it's more fun to practice your strengths and things you're good at. It takes more discipline and it's less fun as such. If you're struggling on a shot or, we're talking about, it can be very frustrating. Mm-hmm. But particularly if you don't know what you're doing wrong, if you have a shot, as I used the example earlier, you only get 3 out of 10 and you practice it for a half an hour, and you still only get a 3 out of 10. Well, there's obviously some issue there. And that's why it's great if you're the likes of a coach. And literally, if I go over to see Chris in Bruges, maybe the first thing I'll do walking in the door is here, have a look at this shot. I'm struggling a little bit with it at it. And hopefully it has the answer. And you go, oh yeah, that's good. I might only have to play it 2 or 3 times and I realize, oh, that is the fix. And then when I go back again to Dublin, then I will give it a half an hour because I know what the problem was. But again, through playing it 10, 20, 50 times, it becomes more comfortable, more natural. And then you feel a habit. So it's important if you have a coach and a good coach that, if there's weaknesses, there's weaknesses your coach will spot. And there's also weaknesses yourself in your game. That even if you pot it, you mightn't have felt overly comfortable, that you maybe feel something was a little bit off. So then if you have a good coach, when you go to him with a problem, he has the answer. And then from that, then you put that work in yourself. And there's nothing more rewarding as a snooker player. As I said, if you have a shot, use that example, you have 3 out of 10. And if you find out the solution yourself or with a coach, and you give it a little bit of work, and that shot, the 3 out of 10, you're getting it 7, 8, 9 out of 10. Beautiful, beautiful. And that confidence you get from that can nearly seep into the rest of your game, and your whole game becomes confidence. Plus, it gives you confidence going forward. If there is another shot you struggle with, that there is a way out of it, and that just adds to your confidence. But again, it's vital if you're doing something wrong, you're doing something wrong, and have maybe be brave enough to say, look, I am struggling. You could be the world number 1. You could be Mark Selby and you're maybe a great player, 3-time world champion, and to have the bravery, I suppose, or humility to go to somebody and say, look, I'm struggling a bit with this shot or these shots. Can you help me? I need help, please. And then ideally that the person you ask has those answers. Because as we said earlier, you could ask a million people for the answers and they mightn't know or they make it worse. But hopefully you have a coach who knows you, knows your game, knows your problem, gives you the fix, and then it's up to you then to go put the work in on it.
I think, yeah, absolutely, Fergal. As a player, Dave, I think as a player, if you're being coached, keep asking the question, why? Why are you advising me to do this? Give me some facts. Give me some factual reasons why I need to do this. Prove it to me. Because ultimately, I'm working with professional players like Fergal. This is his livelihood. This is his living. I don't want to be giving my opinion. That's not good enough. I have to be proving everything that I do. There's got to be factual reasons why you're going to do it in a certain way differently than you were before. That is important. You don't want opinions. You want some facts.
Yeah. If that feedback is crucial, because sometimes what the coach is saying, he might be just, if he doesn't have the knowledge, it's not going to make any difference. It's like me running around the track doing 400 meters and my coach saying, God, you looked great. But he's not actually timing it. But if he times it and say that was 50 seconds, but to run in the Olympics, you need to be doing it in 44. Well, that tells me I need work to do. And despite how good I look to my coach, I'm miles off the pace. But if the coach was there timing it and he says, not only did you look good, but you ran that in 44 seconds. Now going to the tournament, I am in good shape. I can compete because I have the facts. And that gives you confidence, not just my coach telling me I look good. Chris telling me I'm a great long putter. I put 1 out of 10 in a routine. It's better if Chris told me I wasn't a good long putter and I put 9 out of 10. The facts and results are I am a great long putter, rather than just Chris saying, God, you look great.
I could have come in there and been very uncertain with holding myself.
By the way, Dave, you were talking earlier about it's important who you have around you. Just been watching, you've been watching the golf this weekend.
I'm not into golf. When I stopped playing golf, Chris, I stopped watching it.
All right.
And I don't watch a lot of TV, to be honest with you. I'd rather talk to Fergal.
Got a guy called Dustin Johnson. I think he's probably going to win the tournament. I think it's his brother that's on the bag. I think his brother's his caddy.
Yes. Well, that is his inspiration. That is his psychological benefit, if you want to call it that, because he's helping him in a lot of different ways that some players don't have it. I mean, this is why I've helped some of the lads that you both know on the tour, because I know they have great potential. I mean, Jordan. I started Jordan because when I saw Jordan years and years ago, I thought he had huge potential. When I got to know Jordan over the last 3 or 4 years, very well, and I watched him and I watched his routines, and I soon very quickly realized that here's a guy who's like, really, he's better than most of the players on the lower end of the tour, and he should be doing a lot better than what he is. And I don't understand where he's going wrong. And a lot of Jordan's problems are problems that we've been discussing here, and he seems to have adapted to those problems, and he's starting to play well, and he's starting to perform like the player that he is. And so, I mean, it's not just him. There's a few others as well that have come on who are just starting to play really well and prove themselves, and you can recognize that and you can see that. But everything we've talked about here is so important, guys, that by the way, guys, this video, you guys out there, I'm not talking to Chris and Fergal, listening to this gets uploaded on YouTube tomorrow. So if you just type in 3 of our names, unfortunately, Fergal's name will probably come up first, so you'll have to watch it anyway. I mean, I think it's a very good insight. It's a great insight because these guys know what they're talking about, and I've had a string of questions and inquiries, and this is all for my own benefit too, for a lot of the guys that turn up at the tournaments who are really trying to get on the tour, to listen and how you apply yourself, and how to look at the things that you're doing wrong. Look at your subconscious. Look at your conscious. Look what's happening before you go to the event, before you get to the event, before you play your match. Look what you're doing during your match. Focus on your weaknesses and look at all those things. And we've covered a lot of those things. We've covered most of them. There is a question I want to touch on here. There hasn't been that many. By the way, guys out there, give me hit the like button and a thumbs up. If you like anybody who's on here, for that reason. So we got a question here. It's a question from Marco, and he's asking, how do you prepare yourself psychologically for a tournament when you're unknown to anyone and you're facing a bunch of world champions? How do you prepare yourself psychologically, Chris?
Very good point. And we talk about experience, don't we? We said this a little bit earlier that some of these lower ranked players on the professional tour today are now having the opportunity to regularly, because of the way the rankings and the structure of the draws are made now, on a regular basis, they're getting the chance to play against top players. We talked a little bit about the subconscious, and basically, if you walked into a room now and met, if you were a golf player and you met Tiger Woods and he said, "Come on, let's have 9 holes and let's have a look at you," you're not going to feel particularly comfortable on that first tee box, are you? Because your brain's looking at Tiger and going, "My goodness, that's my hero," and if he is your hero, you're just not going to feel comfortable. So you've got to get around these people. You've got to get yourself in these situations as often as you can. But what I would say is, do some subconscious work before, do some video work, do some audio work. I'm not going to go too deep into what we do, but it's about giving the subconscious the information before you do something, which basically creates these what we call memory files in the subconscious. And if you can create memory files through a brilliant routine called visualization, that is something so powerful, Deb. A lot of people don't really understand what visualization means. And if you break it up, visualize, you can visualize whatever you want. And by going through that process of seeing yourself in a certain situation with certain people, your brain starts to create memory files. Basically, that would mean at that time, then, there's more probability you're going to be able to stay calm enough to perform at your best. But of course, self-belief comes into it. If you're a ranked 128 in the world and you've got to go and play Judd Trump, it's more the self-belief and the self-image that's going to be an issue. Do I belong in this arena with this particular guy who's done all these brilliant things in snooker? But through experience and repetition, you're going to build up that self-image. You're going to create the memory files, and you'll start to feel more comfortable.
And I think you're also talking about when you're talking about the memory files, Chris, you're also talking about developing confidence.
Sure.
In that respect too, is that not a part of what you're saying?
Well, confidence is basically linked to self-belief. It's having the belief that what you're attempting to do, you can do it. So that basically, if you believe and you have certainty in your ability to do something, you're going to be more confident about doing it. If you don't believe it's possible, confidence is going to be very difficult because you genuinely don't think it's possible. So confidence is a very fickle thing, but it generally comes from your self-image and your self-belief about yourself. And I'm not going to go too deep here, Dave, but a self-belief, right, in neuroscience, what is that? Self-belief is a cluster of neurons in your brain caused by repetition. And if you think about something over and over and over and over, and you visualize it over and over, and if you show Murphy, who couldn't make a 147 break live on television pre-2014, and you run a specific routine to trick your brain into believing that it is possible, then the probability is now you're going to go and be able to do something in a far better way, which is what he did. He went out and made 3 147 breaks in a period of a few weeks, and he'd never been able to do it before. He's the only player ever to do it in 1 calendar year. So it's amazing that you can trick your brain into believing certain things, which then makes you more comfortable with it when it starts to happen. That's really important.
That's very, very positive. Fergal, what's your take on that?
Yeah, one other point I'd say, if you're playing, if, as best you can, and the points Chris makes are very valid. It's easy to say just go out and play your own game, but you can be certainly very conscious of your opponent if it is a Ronnie O'Sullivan or even using that Tiger Woods example Chris used. But ultimately, if you can remind yourself that ultimately it's not like boxing where if you're fighting one of the greatest boxers ever, what he can and can't do to you, or if you've to a time return or serve. Snooker, you play by yourself. So regardless of your opponent, as good as Ronnie O'Sullivan is, even he can't do anything when he's sitting down. So when you're at the table, you are in control of your own destiny. So as best as you can focus on what you need to do and focus on the game and get engrossed in the game. That's that's the best way to do it. But that's easier said than done. And again, you do have to factor in, particularly if you're inexperienced. And as I was saying, might necessarily be inexperienced playing a world champion. It could be inexperienced playing on TV, playing in a big crowd. So obviously, the more experience you have, that makes it easier. But as soon as you can, even in that match, and chances are, even if you're playing Ronnie O'Sullivan on TV, if you go 2-0 down, sooner or later you forget about that because you've got bigger problems in front of you. And despite yourself, you end up focusing on the game in hand because you get busy with that. And the sooner in a match you can settle into the match and focus on what you need to be doing. And ultimately, if you clear the table, it doesn't actually matter who's sitting down. But that does take knowledge and experience, which you can only get. A lot of stuff you can only just get through time. You can't get 20 years experience through 1 year or 2 years. You try and learn as much as you can, try not repeat mistakes. But ultimately, more experienced you are, the more you are going to learn.
Tiger Woods, best example of the man at the top of his game, best in the world, who probably self-destructed in many ways. Chris, I don't know whether you'd agree with me about his personal life, the complete and total destruction. And then from that end, he rebuilt himself up again, refocused himself completely, got himself back in again. And, people, in that respect, I think a lot of snooker players have done the same. A lot of snooker players have had personal problems in their lives, whether it be we all joke about these things. We joke about divorcing women and stopping here and doing something else for a while and then coming back into the sport. But things like personal problems, divorces, breakdowns, that can happen in snooker too. Yes, boys, I know it'll happen. It can happen. Things like that. There are bereavements. They're going to have an effect on your sport, and so you got to rebuild yourself again and come back into the sport again and refocus yourself. And it's got a lot to do with a lot of things we've covered today. Getting back into it again. Even players who have really struggled on the tour, by the way, and who have done better as they've got a little older or refocused themselves and done well.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, you talked about Tiger there, and obviously he went through a few years of doing what he was doing, and then it became public. And of course, as we know, emotion, how you feel, has a huge impact on performance. And so there's no way Tiger could be in the right state of mind and correct emotional state of mind with all that going on to be able to go out and perform like he was in early 2000s. It's just not possible. I think you talked about making changes. I mean, in fact, I was talking to him at the Ryder Cup a few years ago, and he was talking about his back operation. And he said that, they basically just fused it together. And he was waiting for pain as he was swinging, but because the nerves had been taken away basically from that particular area, he wasn't feeling the pain anymore. So he actually made a physical, in terms of an operation change, to be able to swing the club without pain. I mean, what an amazing thing that is to have to be able to do. But in terms of emotions and what happened, I mean, you've seen a few snooker players, with one of the two of the things that you talked about there, Dave. You were obviously referring to a specific certain high profile multiple world champion, and he's got to a point where he wants to come back and play again. He's gone through some emotional stuff. He's got through that, and now he's missing the buzz of playing professional sport. But it's balance, and all these things like you talked about, bereavements and divorces and relationship problems, etc. It all plays a big role. It's all about having balance in all areas of your life to be able to perform at your best.
Never take your wives to a tournament. I'm going to get into trouble with it. I'm not going to get into trouble for this because I'm married. I haven't been silly enough to marry, by the way.
John, John Parrott had a great.
Lee Westwood's wife or partner is on his bag. How about that one?
Yeah, certainly when I first turned professional, I was with the same management stable as Stephen Hendry. That was kind of one of the big things as such at the time that you certainly wouldn't, was frowned upon, to take your wife to a tournament. But as I said, I think for certain people, I think it could be a great idea, because I said, apart from the time you spend your matches and practice, if that person who you feel comfortable, relaxed with, also happens to be your wife, well then ideal. And I remember John Parrott always telling me he did great. I think he won 9 ranking events, and 7 of them, apart from the UK and the Worlds, were overseas. But they were overseas. He always took his wife. So obviously the fact he was there, he was very comfortable there. Firstly, he was never lonely. He had plenty of company. He could go off sightseeing with her and spend the days with her. So as a result, he was more relaxed and in a better frame of mind and better balance. And so when he went to play, he was totally focused on that, as opposed to maybe being on your own and, getting lonely and depressed and thinking constantly about the match. Sometimes, you need a break. So, it could be, for certain players, it's a great idea. As it could be a friend, could be a coach. But if it's the wife, yeah, absolutely. But there certainly was a time where it was nearly an absolute no-no that you didn't bring your wives, because it would affect your game or your performance. But that's old-fashioned nonsense.
Yeah, but it's not just that. They get on.
I didn't hear that, but I don't think I want to.
I can get away with this because I'm not married. I don't care. I'm not going to get beaten
You
up.
have your cat.
Nobody's going to hit me.
Take your cat to the tournaments.
Fergal, Dave's on his 3rd glass, by the way. We've got to be careful now.
I've done very glasses of red wine. It was my birthday yesterday, and I'm still young. I'm younger than you two. And I've got a bottle of wine here, which I've been drinking very slowly, and very enjoyable too, Right, now, we're going to wrap this up very shortly, boys, because I'm getting a headache. Every time I speak to Chris, he gives me a headache, Fergal, you've improved a lot, ever since you've been coming on the live streams. You've been getting a lot of hits. People want to know you. Chris, you're going to get up there right at the top.
Thank you.
I'm going to touch on something now before we wind this down, okay? We're going to talk about the balls. Okay? Right? Now, Chris, I've been playing with these balls, okay?
I lost them.
Yeah. We'll stay on, Fergal.
Some said it's getting better.
We're back on again. Right now, the balls, okay? I'm not doing very well with these balls, Chris. I have to be absolutely honest with you.
Okay.
Now, I can see the point where you hit. By the way, there's a little, you see, I don't know, you can see, get a little bit closer up there. You can actually see the joint on the ball. Yeah. Does it matter where it sits on the table, or does it have to sort of roll into a position, or?
Well, if you've got to let it settle. But if you're not happy with that joint, you just turn it slightly. But the new version will be it'll be purely white. You won't be able to see that joint. But yeah, you can just turn it on the spot.
Maybe it's just my eyes, I don't know. I've been trying to pot those long ones, with from the yellow and the blue spot, and they're going all over the place. I think I'm better off just playing ping pong, Well, but anyway, listen.
By the way, Dave, you're talking to the master now, because Fergal is very, very good with those balls.
I know. So, guys, listen. If you want to get hold of these balls, get in touch with Chris. Okay, Chris, just remind us of where we can get hold of these, please.
Well, they're at that website, chrishenrysports.com, and basically they're to help you to develop very good technique mechanics and to coordinate those mechanics with good visual aiming, which basically are the two majors for snooker: striking the ball where intended and aiming the ball where intended. And those two things are exactly what those two balls are designed for.
And I've been taking these balls to the tournaments, and some of the good players can actually demonstrate exactly what you've just suggested. I seem to feel in the department, And I'm coming over to Bruges. We're going out for dinner. Okay. You promised a lot of other things. It's okay. We're going to have some dinner. We're going to drink some nice Belgian wine. And we're going to go looking for love as well. Oh, I should have said that. Sorry. Okay. I never do things like that. I'm just coming over for dinner and a glass of wine. Right, guys, listen. I'm just going to have a little look through here in case there's any other questions. You know, we've seemed to answer all the questions. Chris Sterling says the balls have improved his game.
Brilliant,
okay.
Chris.
So, guys, we've covered everything tonight. For those of you who have been watching, thanks very much for joining in. I hope that all the information that we've given you this evening will help you. As I say, this video will be uploaded on YouTube. You know, it'll be the best thing that's ever happened to Fergal and Chris, you know, on YouTube, because they're up there. You know, their personalities have developed since they've started speaking to me. The interview a few months ago has taken Fergal right to the top. He's just beaten Mark Selby. What can I do? I can't help anybody any more than I can do. I'm sick of helping people. And myself and Chris and Fergal, we're not getting paid for this. You know, we're just sitting in the house like everybody else is, scratching the cat. So it's no good. So anyway, this has been a fantastic interview. Chris, thanks very much, as usual.
Pleasure.
Fergal, thanks for stepping in. We'll get Shaun on some other time. And hopefully over the next few weeks, we're going to get some other guys on. There's I'm speaking to a couple of other professionals at the moment. We're going to try and get them on so we can give you some advice on how to progress your games. But I think this is one of the best videos we've actually shot for a very, very long time. And I'm kind of hoping that you can all take a look at this again. You know, I know the video's broken, guys. Don't worry about that. We can put it back together again. But keep watching. And I want to thank you all very much for joining. And we'll be in touch soon. So take care of yourselves.